Welcome back to another episode of Enterprise AI News. I'm your host, Troy Angerdon, and I'm here with my co-host, Ian Wilson. Ian, how are you?
Great. Good to see you again, Troy.
Yeah, you as well. So I understand we're going to be looking at a bunch of interesting companies in the space and trying to make sense of the ecosystem, kind of separate out the cloud AI platform providers from maybe the AI or ML platform providers, and kind of helping people make sense of all that. So when we dive right in?
So the data cloud with analytics for me is what I'm calling the AI cloud. I'm moving all that compute and storage. And so obviously this is something that I think about constantly. And I'm sure most of you guys are thinking about, if you don't have a cloud, how do you move to the cloud? If you're halfway there, how do you complete the journey? What are the key points? What are the players? And that's really the staging off point here. And I started off with Baidu shares soar after surprise revenue gain from AI push. And this was really talking about its stock price gaining off of great revenue off of its AI cloud. So that was an interesting point. I'd also noticed something like this AI chip startup getting another 30 million for growth. I know there's lots of AI chip startups getting growth.
There are.
And where are these chips going? Well, most of them are going to be going into data centers.
Yeah, and
So
most of those will be in public clouds, yeah.
most of those will be in public clouds, which of course is currently dominated by NVIDIA. And a lot of NVIDIA's revenue now is focused on AI chips. They're probably the biggest player in that space. I think that doesn't surprise anybody. And I noticed this article in the Economist recently, very much the same kind of thing. NVIDIA's also, it seems, trying to build its own cloud platform for AI as well. But that really brought me on to looking myself at taking a deeper look at all the main players. And when I did that, and you and I, Troy, have just broken these up into a number of buckets because there are a whole range of players.
Right.
And I had a bunch of questions that I'm going to throw over to Troy to take a look at about where do these all fit in the ecosystem? Um, and obviously, we've got the main players that we all know. We've got AWS, Google Cloud Platform, GCP. We've got Microsoft's Azure AI.
Mhm.
IBM have their Cloud Pak, their own service that I think has a lot of really great aspects. But there's a bunch of these, as well as the counterparts in China. As we mentioned, Baidu has
Right.
their AI cloud.
Mhm.
Tencent has their TI platform, which is basically their AI platform, as does Alibaba. So they're almost the counterparts of AWS, GCP, and Azure
Exactly. Yep.
over in China.
They're huge.
That's one bucket.
Mm.
Those are the big players. Where are they sitting right now, Troy?
Well, I mean, you nailed it. I think there's kind of this kind of handful of 10 companies, the largest 10 clouds, and there are always sort of 9 or 10, depends on who's counting, but it's all the ones you've mentioned. Some folks would throw in some of the folks you've also added to your later list, like the Salesforces and SAPs and VMwares of the world. I'd put those in a pretty different bucket. So there's traditional, makes me laugh to say that, but the traditional public cloud players that have been around now for 13 years, if you go back to the beginning of Amazon, but they've all developed and grown and continued to just, rocket ahead and take over in terms of like compute and data center footprint globally. And it's all the ones you mentioned. And then all of them developed their own, they were using AI, all of them were using AI internally in their operations. And then they developed customer facing AI and machine learning services, which they then resell to developers, right, for their own products. So those are definitely massive players. If you're a bigger company, you probably are going to build a hybrid across multiple of them, or you may bring some of that stuff in-house. That's a different conversation. But the 13 years that we've been doing public cloud computing, that's the beginning of scores of decades of transitioning into the cloud. And you're right, AI is no different from that. And I think that anybody who says they're doing AI and they're doing it in their own data center really doesn't know what they're doing at this point, because they don't have the elasticity, the ability to scale that infrastructure on them
Yeah.
that they really need, that the cloud can give them.
So I've noticed, obviously this is a space that's continuously transitioning. And what I see today makes complete sense. But in the past, there was a big focus on having the cloud principally for your data. But most of your analytics was done offline in your own on-premise applications wherever, particularly if you had an analytics group that were used to running on their own on-premise services.
Mhm.
But now I'm seeing both things move to the cloud, which makes total sense because you've got your storage for your data, but now you've got your compute for your analytics. And so actually just using the cloud for data storage and then doing your analytics back at home doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it makes total sense to have them both on the cloud. So you've got your analytics there. And it's, for me, it's not just about, and I think a few of these other players start to show this, it's not just about having all that elastic compute on the cloud so you can just scale up and down as you need, although that's a critical factor. And I saw some, typically when you think about analytics and BI, they get a batch job done. A manager will say, oh, we need this report or we need this data, and they have a batch job. Why? Well, because they can't run it on their data servers on premise because it slows down their work that's going on day by day, their transactions. They have to run it at night. They have to run it in batch because it takes hours. And then they would say, oh, when do you want your report? You can get it next week. Well, on the cloud, you just spin up as many servers as you want to produce it in as quick a time as you want. You want it in 5 minutes? We can do that. We'll just spin up 1,000 servers and bring them down. You get your report almost in real time.
Well,
So
let me caution you on that. You say that. I think that's the industry tagline, but it's not really true. It's not architected to do that. That's the marketing more than the reality.
What's the word I'm looking for? That's the nirvana we're trying to move towards.
Yeah, for sure.
But
There's definitely there. It's possible in some cases if it's architected correctly.
I think, right. Well, this is, I think, what we'll get to with Snowflake.
Yeah, for sure.
Is the second thing, though, I think that is also key is once we start moving onto the cloud, you can also get a lot of capabilities for sharing because you've got everybody looking at the same thing. Now, of course, you can potentially get that on premise, but I think it's much more of a native capability when you're starting to use cloud tools for analytics that you've got a single analytics view that your whole team's sharing. And I think being able to share between your teams is also another capability that moving to the cloud will start to bring in.
I think the key there is, if you have one global your internal private network, then sharing amongst your team, even if it's an in-house system, is totally fine. You can already do that in any application using. Where it got really easy for any cloud-based SaaS application, we've been using SaaS for 20 years with Salesforce, right? Any of those kinds of things. What we found was, boy, did it ever make it easier to work with partners? Because now we're not having to give them some kind of certification to get in through the firewall, to have accounts and users and permissions and manage all these complex, login issues. Whereas it's like, oh yeah, just log in with a partner account into our Salesforce account. It's already secured and contained and, restricted, and they're just going to a Salesforce data center. So in terms of getting beyond your team to your broader team, i.e. your partner network or your customers, man, that made it a million times easier being in a cloud-based anything.
So I think that brings us nicely to Snowflake. And I really like Snowflake. I really like what they're doing, particularly, obviously, they've got a massive focus on data, and they've been trying to automate, data engineering, from data source to data consumers, what I call it, what most people call a data pipeline, ingesting data, processing it, and making it available to people to use in things like data science and data applications. And what I really like about what they're doing is they're trying to automate all of that. So you talked about, making things available to partners, but making it much simpler than plugging in your own stuff, basically becoming a one-stop shop for both data and analytics.
Yeah.
What's your view on Snowflake?
I love them. I think they're really interesting because the challenge as you know, and we've talked before, like I came out of the BI space, I was at Business Objects back in the day. And we were there at the beginning as cloud was taking off, but the pattern for the last 10 years, 13 years has been keep your crown jewels, your data in your data warehouse, in your data center. And yeah, you're going to start put customer facing applications on the cloud or kind of less mission critical applications on the cloud, or, in some cases, critical ones like Salesforce for sales. But the crown jewels, kind of the data warehouse, always stayed kind of on premises in your data center. And really, I think the innovation from Snowflake has been, we want to make data warehouses which have traditionally been massively complex, extremely expensive to set up. We're going to make them run on every infrastructure. So we're going to run them on Google. You can see the little logos there, Google, Azure, and Amazon. We don't care which infrastructure you want to run on. We're going to make it data warehouse as a service on any or all of those infrastructures. So we don't care which one you kind of choose as your primary or your primary and secondary vendors. We work with them, and you can basically set up a data warehouse, set up a data lake, do all your data, engineering and ETL, extract, transform, load, essentially like extracting the data and making transformations, putting it into a data warehouse. You can do all those things in their system with easy setup. And do it across those infrastructures. So it spans the, multiple big clouds that are out there. So no matter which one you use, you can sort of still interact with this service. And the data gravity, issue of like where the data grows is where it stays is huge for these guys because they keep building data warehouses. That data will never leave. It will always be in this Snowflake set of services. And what's interesting is they are frenemies and co-competitors with the underlying cloud companies who have their own equivalent products. But Google, BigQuery or Amazon Redshift, if you're in there, you can get out, but it's going to take work. Whereas if you're in Snowflake running on Amazon and you want to move that to Snowflake running on Google, it's much simpler to do. So I think that what's been interesting about them is like, let's make it multi-hybrid, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and that way people are not trapped. Now they're sort of, they have a lock-in at another level, which is the data warehouse, which is sitting on those clouds. But I think they've been really innovative, really pushing forward and just crushing the market in terms of growth and momentum.
And I think it's an important conversation for any enterprise because so many companies I talk to, they have groups looking at what should their data architecture be? What should their pipeline be? Yep. How are they going to bring all their data together? How are they going to rationalize their databases? How are they going to build a single source of truth? And they're coming at this from the perspective of we build the data architecture. Really what they're saying is, how do we build this? Well, of course, the answer is you don't build that, you use that.
Well, I think that you could separate that out. You're right. They're not building the underlying database, right? You're not.
No.
Nobody these days would say, let's build our own database.
But trying to re-engineer their architecture to look something like this is a massive undertaking.
It is. Yeah. And these guys are taking away a lot of the pain and a lot of the pain of, frankly, just working with the traditional data warehouse vendors that were out there. That they're sort of disrupting by saying we're going to be cloud first, cloud only. I think it's really interesting. And Frank Slootman, who's their CEO, he does a lot of press on this. He's been really vocal about AI as being, look, it's all built on data. We all know this, and this data will be on the cloud, and AI processing will be on the cloud. We live on the three biggest clouds. AI is going to be generated. A lot of those models are going to be built, trained, and run on the three biggest clouds. So we might as well co-locate them with the data, which is in the Snowflake infrastructure. Right. So I think he's been really bullish and really positive on that. They've been doing a ton of investments, marketing investments, I think integration of product investments with folks like Dataiku and some of the other ML platform companies. So they're pushing really hard on the idea that data is growing, AI is growing, cloud is a given, and all of that, all of that makes sense together, which is what you've been saying.
Right. And I think, if you're looking to build AI on the cloud, this is your template. Now, I'm not saying go ahead and just jump straight into Snowflake, although it's a great example, but this for me is the template. You should be looking for something like this. I mean, certainly from my perspective, when I think about everything I would want, it's basically wrapped up in most of what they've got here, and I just like the simplicity. I'm a big fan of simplicity, particularly for most enterprises, because, if your business is building jet engines, don't be spending your time doing data architecture. Nobody's buying you for that.
Right. Yeah. And to a certain degree, you still have to do some of your own, to be clear, you still have to do some of your own work and building your own data pipelines, your own transformation pipelines, your own, those things that you're building with the tools, but don't build your own tools. Just build the workflows on top of the tools.
Right.